Welcome, everybody. I see you out there. I'm Kimberly, and I'm really happy to be moderating this beautiful 90-minute session we're going to have for the Association for Spiritual Integrity. And also want to just welcome everybody and all of you that will be joining us in the future and listening to this. We also feel your presence here too. So we're going to begin, and I just invite us all to breathe into this space and presence yourself as is good for you. And I'd like to invite our leader and visionary, Jack, to take us into really the big picture of our purpose here today. Jack?
Thanks, Kimberly. Hi, everybody. You might remember that one of our central initiatives that we started last year was looking at a pilot for peer support. What gave rise to that is what I'd like to speak about for a few minutes. And later on in the webinar, I'm going to speak again about what the findings were of phase 1 of our peer support initiative. We weren't really sure what was driving this movement towards looking at ethical standards and spiritual leadership. When we first met at SAND, Rick, myself, Craig Holliday, John Prendergast, a few of us were around a table saying, okay, we're all interested in this. We need to come together in some way. We weren't really sure what it was going to look like. And the ongoing unfolding has become a hallmark of how the ASI works. We're learning as we're going, as we're discovering new information. And so at the start of the ASI, we could only look at the history of what is causing these ethical behaviors in spiritual leadership. Surely within spiritual leadership, it would be more ethical. There would be more integrity, surely. And so in our investigation and research and brainstorming, speaking with people from industry to try and find out where is the spiritual community different from regular industry, from the commercial enterprises, and what is it that they're doing that we might have missed. So here's what we identified as core issues that were causing ethical behavior, which gave rise to peer support is one way to address this. We noticed that spiritual leaders traditionally and contemporarily were saying, I've no one to talk to. There's no one I can talk to. I've no friends who are not students. I don't have anybody I can trust to ask for advice. Nobody sees me. Nobody understands the level of access to other, I'm trying to look for language that's not so rooted in my own lineage. The viewpoint that I look for, the spiritual wisdom that I have attained, I don't know anybody who can understand me. This gives rise to loneliness. And there isn't a tradition of you got to talk to other people who've been here. The amount of spiritual leaders who believe that nobody is at the level of consciousness that they are at is quite interesting. And yet we advocate unity consciousness, most of us at some level of our teachings, but at the same time, then we're special. So there's a lot of little contradictions going on in our own process. What seemed to be not held in the collective traditionally was a role for a spiritual leader where they were not deified. A role as a parent was often taken away because vows of celibacy. A role of being a lover, being a friend, finding mates to hang out with that were not connecting with the spiritual leader as their teacher, or as a teacher, as an esteemed being. And these traditional ways of poising spiritual leaders in a particular role and identifying them with being what the role means for the collective served only to separate the spiritual leader from their own needs. A disconnect happened around what they needed themselves. And so the deifying of a leader has resulted that in a process whereby the leader is more upstream from their participants, their followers, their students, their clients. And the more upstream we are, the less we discover what the impact of what comes from us is having. And so the more we absorb ourselves in a different stage of consciousness, or in the role of a spiritual leader and get off on it, because both exist, the more we connect with that, the more we find that we're at a further distance from our peeps, and we think we know what's going on with them. We really want to believe what's going on with them, but we don't have any system to bridge that gap. Peer support is one way to start to bridge this gap. We have found that there is a lack of information about what the role does to us. We have found that there are not many places of where you can get advice and guidance for yourself. We have found that it seems to be very normalized and cool and seem to be a good thing to not need friends who are not your students, to not need ways in your lifestyle that give you fun and enjoyment and healthy recreation, balance. We have found that the neural changes that happen in some spiritual processes, maturation, recent studies, like in the last 10 or 15 years now, have shown us that these neural pathway changes that happen make you actually unable to assess what's going on. And when feedback comes from a student, or a student is disgruntled, the only capacity you have is to, number one, listen to your own inner voice. Whether it's your own conditioning or not, you won't have the capacity to recognize this. Your own inner voice is going to be the authority. And what's going on for the student, the neural pathways dictate that you will perceive that that's their stuff. That's them exercising something of the ego that must be addressed within teachings. And so we have, actually just last week, a teacher who said, I'm too absorbed in God. I can't do this. I can't do this type of work. I have no interest in joining a peer support group. I'm too absorbed in God. So this kind of disconnect happens when the power differential is not balanced in any way, or it's not recognized to be a power differential. What happens is that the identification with being a spiritual leader gets too strong, and they've lost the ability to monitor how they're doing as human beings. It's not their fault. Part of it can be addressed by setting up peer support, which can do two things. Number one, the peer support normalizes, I'm not doing okay. I need help. Joining up for peer support means support is valid. I place a value on support. This alone helps the growing up part, the post-awakening, post-shifts in consciousness. It helps us to grow up when there is peer support, when we're able to say, I need support. And so what we wanted to do at the very start, and I'll pass over to Tom very shortly, what we wanted to do at the very start was like the problems that are causing ethical behavior are in two camps. the problems of where people just don't know any better. And we're a product of our time, of normalizing spiritual leadership. We're taking it out of ashrams and monasteries and churches. We don't have a model for how that looks in a healthy way. And so we have spiritual leaders that are floundering and might not even recognize they're floundering. And then we have spiritual leaders who know that they're manipulating. They're, I'm glad to say, very much in the minority, but are using their power, know that they're full of self-doubt, know that they're bluffing. And then that leads to more egregious misbehavior, for sure. But there are two groups that behave unethically. There are two. We're working with, and the ASI is, I suppose, driven by those of us who are like, yeah, it's quite likely we're screwing up. We got to learn how to do this better because we want to do better. And this is the community that the ASI is about. We welcome everybody, but we want to do better. So we've got to learn about what happened historically and what can be addressed and what can we give to the generation that comes after us, to put structures in place so that they don't flounder like we have done, learning on the go like we're doing, very often without training, without support, and with this idea that our role makes us immune. Our role as a spiritual leader makes us immune from all things human. And of course, it's the opposite. It's about diving deeper into your humanness for a more balanced, integrated, grounded spiritual leadership service. So we left the peer support phase 1 quite open. We investigated a lot of models of peer support out there, not-for-profits, commercial industry, any place I could find peer support. It's like, what does it look like? What does it look like? Darn, that's not going to address our issues either. That's not going to address our issues either. And so we've decided, let's run 2 pilots in order to find out what do we need. Let it come from the voice of our community itself. So that brings me up to Tom, because one day Tom approached me.
Okay. Thanks, Jack. Yeah, I was attending the Science and Non-Duality Conference in 2019, and I met Jack and some of the other folks on the board. They were giving some presentations there. I was at the conference to give a presentation on my own work. I'm a research scientist, and I work with theories of adult cognitive and spiritual development. And I also have some background in group facilitation and nonviolent communication and conflict resolution. So I loved what they were up to. I think the ASI had been around for a couple of years at that point. Yeah, and I had an idea for a project that I wanted to propose, which was similar to what we're doing. And so I mentioned it to Jack, and she said, yes, we've been thinking about something like that. And so here you are, you show up and you've got some energy in this very aligned idea. So up to that point, the ASI had spent a significant amount of time honing down their ethical honor codes. And there's one set for teachers and one set for students. They're very nice. I think all of you have seen them, but if you haven't, check them out. They also had a service for registering complaints from students, and also a service for setting up mediation. So, you know, I liked what they had worked out with those guidelines or honor codes, and those kind of agreements are really important, I think. But also, I think the hard work is in the gray areas, trying to apply, you know, what most people might agree are good guidelines and principles and ethics. But everybody's got places where they rub up against their own gray areas. So I've had really good experiences with men's groups and other types of support groups that I thought was relevant here. So I started talking with Jack and the board about prototyping this project. I'm gonna I'm going to read just one paragraph from the website because it says it better than I could come up with for the moment. Spiritual leadership can be a pretty complex and isolating role. When things are challenging, we often have few or no colleagues that we can lean on to share what's really going on for us and get honest, caring feedback. Spiritual teachers and counselors and coaches are not immune from having their pre-existing biases and blind spots impact their work. And even with the high ethical standards that most aspire to, we can be challenged by situations with complex trade-offs and nuanced gray zones and ambiguity. So that's basically what life is like. It's full of those gray zones and ambiguity. So, so the idea is basically to have these, peer support groups where teachers and counselors, leaders of various sorts could basically define their own values and ethical standards that wouldn't differ from the ASI's guidelines, but everyone has a particular way of saying, this is what's important to me. This is what I want to hold myself up, the standard I want to hold myself up to. But sometimes I need help. Figuring out some of this stuff. So in 2021, we started our first, we had 4 prototype groups, and those ran for about 6 months. There were, I think, between 5 to 8 people in each group, and they met once or twice a month for those 6 months. We selected 4 facilitators from among people who volunteered for that role, and we had a couple of facilitator trainings. So those groups were quite successful based on the feedback forms from the participants. And I think Jack is going to say more about what we found later. Each group had its own path, and the facilitation was fairly light to allow the participants to really take ownership of the space. But they were different. And some groups were based more on having fixed discussion topics that would get people going. And others were more ready to just dive into an open format and just check in and say what was really up for them, what was alive that week for them. So either through the planning of the facilitator or just what kind of came up in the moment, there are many themes that came up. I'll just mention a handful. The ethics of charging money for spiritual guidance, having friends or relatives that are also students, what's a healthy relationship with those that have a higher status in your religious tradition, the changing landscape of gender and identity politics, or identity dynamics. And just to say, we want people to not just focus on the challenges, but also to be able to celebrate what's wonderful about their work and how their work is evolving. So our long-term goal, I would say, is to create containers that are safe enough for participants to share vulnerably and deeply about the challenges in their leadership, and let whatever themes come up, just come up naturally. But it takes a while to build the trust and get into a flow with groups. So for most of them, we start with more, not a totally open-ended format. So we're just about to start our second round of these groups, and we've learned a lot from the first prototypes, as Jack was saying. And I think, so someone else, I think, will talk about the logistics, but I think we're hoping to double the number of groups that we have this time. Is that right? Yeah, that's all I've got.
Thank you, Tom. Wonderful. I'll just say briefly, and we'll transition to Jack, who will share the results of phase 1 with us. I was in a peer circle myself, which really inspired me to step into service here. And it is support as much as problems, right? Just to have others, maybe likely a different area than yours, or different spiritual tradition than yours, but yet share so much, and to have that support as well has been extraordinary. So I invite you, Jack, would you take us through the results of phase 1?
Sure. We had an option for people to fill out a survey after each meeting if they wanted to, and that didn't really happen. We had a meeting in the middle, which was really informative about the process mid-flow. By far the greatest learning was when the event was over, by far. What we learned from meetings and surveys, garnering information from participants, and then a special meeting with the facilitators themselves in order to tell us what their experience was. What we learned was very interesting. The key findings that are going to inform our way on, that's what I'd like to talk about now, but the key things, because of course I could talk for hours about the experiences of what happened. Kimberly has touched on them there, you know, as well as Tom. It's like the support as well as the the celebration. Both are in there and both are key. What we learned that will inform our way on is that it's really important that we normalize that ongoing training and education is part of what we do as spiritual leaders. Conversations came up in some groups around, oh, did you go to so-and-so's trauma-informed training to be more trauma-informed? And noticing other people in the group, I don't get training at all. I don't need training. I just listen to this inner voice. I don't need training. And so that shift of, oh, you know, engaging that part of like, maybe it's a competitiveness. Oh, everybody else is being trained. I'm being left behind. Whatever it takes to encourage upskilling and upgrading, I'm for it. And so normalizing the ongoing education and training of spiritual leaders was a gem that I hadn't expected. Sharing of ideas of what courses are good and not courses, and courses are not good. The practice itself within peer support allowed us to receive feedback. I'm using us because I became a participant as well with no role. I didn't want to be facilitator. I wanted to come there as raw Jack looking for support. And so in no other capacity. And so feedback comes in these groups to you, and it kind of trains us on how to receive feedback. I certainly learned different ways of hearing feedback and how I responded to feedback. And it influenced how I request feedbacks from my students and what I do with the feedback that comes from them. That was a gem. So within the peer support structure itself, the methodology that we're using going into phase 2 is in itself enhancing our own maturation as people and as professionals. It's addressing both. That is what's necessary so that we can be better at what we do, because we do bring our personalities to our work. It's inevitable. No matter how deep a channeler or how awake one is, the filters of our conditionings will happen as soon as that inner voice gets filtered through your brain. It happens for all of us as long as we're in a human body. And so the peer support helps us to identify what's going on in our humanness. One thing that we discovered that was really toxic when it happened was, it's probably a strong word, but I'm going to go for it. One thing that did not help at all was if people met outside of the peer support meeting, even if it was for the most innocuous logistical thing, if a chat happened with a subgroup of the peer support group, some cohesiveness broke, a split came back into the group. that was a kind of a surprise to me to see how deep the impact was of a sidebar in the container. Guidelines about these kinds of practices will be built into our second phase. The last and final big thing we discovered was that if there was a group where some were spiritual leaders and some had been in a role of spiritual leadership, but were not doing something right now, that created a split in the group, because there was nothing alive with which the learnings from the group sharing could be brought into our work and help us to evolve. And it's like a kind of something heavy came in to those groups, because the ones who were in a position of spiritual leadership found themselves, not all the time, but mostly, sliding into the role of leading and guiding the other members. That's not what peer support is, that's spiritual teaching. So everybody has to come with an equal entry marker of, yes, I'm actively working to support groups in their spiritual path. It's absolutely necessary. The groups who didn't do that, they didn't work. It didn't become authentic peer support. I think they're the key things. They're the key things. Yeah. Oh yeah, it was one other thing. I knew there's something hanging around there. One format that emerged as being really useful was when a participant, a teacher, a leader, shared something that was going on in their life. And then at the end of that said, I'm looking for advice or I'm looking for support. I want one of these. Which one do I want? It trained the spiritual leaders to know what they needed. That's a gem for every spiritual leader and absolutely necessary going forward in our profession. So to create that neural pathway to, like, I just need support here, actually. I need empathy. I just need someone to hear me. I need a witness. Or I haven't a clue what to do about this dynamic that's going on with a student where I really am sexually attracted to them, for example. And so when these types of dynamics come up, for the teacher to say, this is what's alive, and I need advice, I just need to hear myself saying it. Very useful. So it's layered. You see, every guideline that we're bringing in on phase 2 has been thought through and proven to be essential to help us to grow as individuals, and to grow up as individuals, and to have a more an integrated approach to how we function, so that we can connect better with our students and take care of ourselves as adults. Because the key point is, if we don't know what our needs are, and if we're not taking care of our own needs, we will unknowingly, in total blind ignorance, project our needs onto our students. That's where bad practice comes in. And so all of these findings are guidelines for phase 2. It might sound like phase 2 is going to be really restrictive. Actually, it's not. It's not. It's got simple practice at the beginning, simple practice at the end, the themes, such as Tom suggested. And although we have a longer list of those themes that came up as topics, boundary topics. What do you do if? What do you do if a student gives you a large donation? How do you relate to them? Because you automatically want to give them more. Your system wants to reciprocate. So these themes will be suggested as, hey, have these as guidelines. These can be explored. They're topical, and please add to this Google document so that the common issues that we face at least are there for discussion. Maybe in 3 years' time, there will be books written about these. There will be educational courses where the issues that we come up with as spiritual leaders will be addressed within formal education. I don't know. I'm just looking forward to where it can go. But right now, this is our guideline for phase 2.
And so it shall be. Courses for teachers. So I'm just going to say a little bit, again, Kimberly, about what this looks like logistically, just to get the frame. And then we'll shake it up a bit and do some other things, and I'll share a little bit more. So just to, state the obvious, these peer circles are for spiritual teachers. And what do I mean by that? Certainly the tradition of, the church minister down the street, or those of you who teach through your writing, or formally or informally, but also many, who are our spiritual teachers in this time? There are many yoga teachers I know that actually teach spirituality, and people come to them because sometimes we don't go to church anymore. We go to the yoga studio to get our spiritual hit. So it really is for those who are in that spiritual leadership teacher role and need that support. Very collegial in that way. So when the next phase, and someone jump in and just correct me if I miss something or forget, but we're starting in January with the next round of peer circles. The recommendation is this is 8 weeks, it's 6 to 8 weeks, but you want to meet, 8 times every other week. So you want to meet about 8 times every other week, 6 to 8 times. And what ASI is going to do is the logistics of putting these groups together. So once one signs up, there's a survey that's going to be put in the chat box. And there it is. Once you sign up, you can sign up to be part of the peer circle support, and then they'll put a group together for you, which is just fantastic and appreciated. You don't have to go hustle on your own. And it really, lends to, a cross paradigmatic system. Meaning we can talk to others in similar positions, but come from different silos, shall we say, or traditions. And that is, for me, just speaking personally, when we can have our belief systems intersect a little bit in this world, that action is an act of peace right now. Intersecting bubbles of beliefs coming together. It's very beautiful. So other important part of that is facilitators. We are and will be looking for facilitators. I'm looking at some of you out there, you know who you are. And so there'll be an assigned facilitator. We are also going to be doing a facilitators training. We have yet to announce that date, but there's going to be I'm in it, I'm involved in it, I'll be there, and I'm very excited about the vetting of the content and the literature reviews, and just, how we have looked at this. The team has really looked at how to empower a facilitator for success from different perspectives, and I'm excited with what we're going to offer there. So please sign up to be a facilitator, and then we'll get you a lot of support and frameworks for how to do that and do that well. Let's see, when January, we talked about that, fill out the survey. What else to say? What are they like? So I was tasked with saying what they were like. Well, we've addressed it a bit. For me, the most important, just speaking honestly and vulnerably, confidentiality was the most important thing to me, of knowing that that rule of what is said in circle stays in circle, so that you don't have those sidebars and, that no matter what, nobody talks about it outside of that. And when that is held, I believe, here's a belief system for me, but it feels tangible, and the trust and the space that one can build is really significant and beautiful. Yeah. Happy to answer any questions, other questions that might come up. The next step for you certainly is to fill out that survey and let other spiritual teachers know about it as well. And yeah, we'll circle back if there's any other logistical information we can go to. So we wanted to open it up to just a lot of you out there are familiar with this topic. Wanted to open it up to some general discussion of reflections that come up. Certainly questions are welcome. And thoughts that arise for you. Let's open it up to the group. You can go ahead and raise your hand if you'd like, or just pop your microphone off and start speaking. That's okay too.
I had a question about the two camps that Jack was outlining. So I wanted to kind of tease that out a little bit. So one was people who were spiritual teachers who were kind of stuck in conditioning where the integrity or the ethics was sort of more antiquated, and they might have a lot of blind spots. And then the other were the ones that were manipulating. So did you have in your pilot groups at all the folks that had those blind spots, and that through the process, was it over a year, or how long was the group process? But did you find evolution happening in that camp? And I didn't know how long your pilot group was too.
Tom, you might remember better.
I could say something here if you.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. And then again, there's different opinions amongst those of us who are on the core team. So feel free to throw all the opinions in. But, there's a sense, and this came up recently in an email, that, are we just preaching to the choir? Like the people that are the worst defenders, they're never going to come to a peer support group, and they think they're already holier than thou or whatever. And that's fine. The worst offenders that, make it into the news and the headlines, or they're at the top of a very large pyramid. They have thousands of students all over the world. We don't expect them to join something like this, but that's probably 1% of all spiritual teachers and counselors and leaders. And for those folks who think that, are kind of out of reach of this kind of process, that's why we have the complaint line and the mediation support and other things and the guidelines. And, a student can get the guidelines and give it to their teacher and say, here, think about this. So there's other resources for the sort of, worst offender type people. And, if I don't want to like rank and file, or the more regular spiritual teachers are, more and more appreciate this, it'll work its way up in a democratic fashion, become more normalized. And even the worst offenders will start to think, what's going on here? Maybe I better tune in. So,
But did you find, how long were
I think we met, I think it was like 8 to 12 sessions in the first group. And I don't think there was anybody there that was, there wasn't anybody in it who was like a big name spiritual teacher.
there was a sense of that what you were doing was supporting the growing up?
Oh, certainly.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's what I was getting at. So you have a strong sense that what you learned, what you did was valuable in the growing up lines of development, and even more how to support that for the next round.
Yeah.
However it comes in. So the container was really supportive with that goal in mind of the blind spots. Like one of the most highlighting things for me was all of the abuse going on in the Buddhist world that you guys shared last year. And that's, it would be in that one camp, I would think too, of this sort of condition, lots of blind spots that I was really surprised by.
Yeah.
And sort of find that I would imagine that a group like this might open some of those blind spots with those kind of even more traditional spiritual contexts that one might think were completely pure.
Yeah. One of the things I don't think any of us mentioned who are in a group is just hearing other people talk really authentically about what's going on for them was really transformational. And I mean, that's where I got as much as anything, you know, just hearing the struggles and the issues and just the heartfelt, you know, my best friend that was my student, and we had a falling out, and you know, it's just like you just really learn a lot from other people's experiences and how they dealt with it, and yeah,
Mm,
yeah.
cool.
I'd like to add in a little bit, and Kimberly Braun, and I was one of the facilitators in the pilot, and thought it was a wonderful first pilot. You know, when you're bringing a vision and idea into form for the very first time, there's a certain element of setting up enough structure so that it can move, and accepting that you're also just jumping in a bit to see what happens. And one of the powerful things we discovered was, how do we ask the right questions to get to the model and the form that would be most effective towards these end goals? Because we found there were some strengths and weaknesses in the pilot itself, since the experience was new for most, to be in a peer-to-peer support, how to hold the vision and the purpose of the group all the way through, so that these deeper parts of the self could be unearthed, could come forward, and in that coming forward, as we all know, could transmute and heal. So we did afterwards do some processing on the form and the shape, what would be helpful for facilitators to either be trained in or be familiar with or have at their disposal, and how could we even speak more potently to the real purpose and mission of the group, so that those that are really seeking that and recognizing its value and its imperative are giving their yes, so that the group stays really true to its purpose. So that took quite a bit of processing afterwards, since our groups had some strengths and weaknesses. And I was drawn into the process because I had been a part of peer-to-peer support groups in my seminary training, and it was different than the way we're doing it, but it was so dramatically influential, and I loved it, and I had been longing for it for a while. So it attracted me like a bee to honey. It was like, yes, more of that, please. So I think that we're on to something that's fantastic, and that it will educate the larger populace just by virtue of what it's doing as we hone and develop the process to be even more fine-tuned. So that's why we wanted to give a couple months before the launch in January, so that some materials and some models and some formation can happen for those who are stepping forward as facilitators, and or I know we had a logistics person as well. I don't know if that's still out there as having one, because we found that we could have spent more time with that, and there wasn't the time for it. So it wasn't a failing, but that spending more time with that could make the groups even more effective.
Hi, my name's Annie. I think you can hear me, right? And just to dovetail on what you were just saying, Kimberly, I came from a system where there was a lot of deification of the teacher that served me at the time, but I teach yoga. I don't know if I call myself a spiritual teacher, but spiritual teachings do come through when I teach. But I just want to say, from the perspective of the student, this is a great gift, because when you are with a teacher who is not deified, that allows the inspiration of more autonomy on the part of the student, which is fantastic. And I guess I wasn't ready for that earlier in life. I don't know, but I have since been working with teachers that are of that ilk, where they are in that humanity as well as that pure divinity. And it's been a tremendous growth opportunity for me. And I think this will be what is available to other students. So thank you very much to all of you for your efforts.
Thank you so much, Annie, and everybody. Anyone else feeling the spirit move through to share? We'd love to hear from you. Lisa,
Hi.
is it? Hi.
Hi. I'll say hello.
Catherine.
I've just been on a course with a master class with Jack, and she told me that I should step up. So here I am stepping up. I'll be turning 70 next week, and I love the fact that Jack keeps talking about how she loves creating new beginnings. Like this is when I found out what you guys are up to, I was thinking, oh my God, I hope they're strong enough. I hope they're young enough, because I started the first rape crisis center in Canada in the 80s. And, you know, I got through 3 years, and I mean, I was just so beaten up. So if you want to know what doesn't work, I'm a great person to figure that out with. And then I thought, does someone bring something to the group on what we tried many, many times and it doesn't work? I mean, and then when Jack just said, oh, that sounds a lot like you needing support, not advice. But then my years went on, and I went on to become very successful in other areas. And I stepped outside of that box of being spiritually needing to help people. And then I loved interior design and loved all kinds of things. And so when Jack says it's important that you have a life that's very different, I could have a party, but I can't really, because all my friends are so different, they wouldn't get along, right? And I pride myself in that, because they just wouldn't get along. And I'm thinking, that was my gift, to actually say, okay, that didn't work. Well, what else will work? What else works in your life? And of course, I've been Rupert Spire and Francis Lucille and a Jack student for about 10 years now. And so I've taken all those things together and thinking, oh, well, Jack says you kind of should step up, do something. And I'm thinking, I wonder what that could be, because I look around, I come onto these Zoom calls, and all I do is look at all the faces, you know, like, is this a group? Is this a group I want to hang out with? Do they look like they're fun? Do they look like they love new things? I mean, I'm also on the board with the first dyslexic group that's just started last year, the worldwide first new dyslexic group out of England. And they're now in New York City having their big conference in a couple of months. I am a dyslexic, right? And I know all the gifts that go with it. I also know all the trauma that goes with it too. I have lots of stuff to work on. It's never ending, you know. So, but I love the new beginnings. I love new groups. I love the excitement of, what are you guys doing? Really? Can you really pull this off? Because this is
Thank you.
huge. And
Thank you, Catherine.
I'm just excited to come in and say hi. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your share. Lisa, is it? Did I see a little hand there?
Unmute myself. Hi, I have to go in just a couple minutes, so forgive me if I'm brief. I'm so glad you all are here, and I was so grateful to be part of the first round of the peer support. We had a great group, and it was really helpful at a really important time for me, because I was wrestling with a lot of things around putting out the manuscript that I wrote for my last book, Sacred Medicine, which ended up turning into more of a kind of investigative journalist sort of expose of spiritual teachers and healers than I had intended. I didn't go into it with that intention. So it was really helpful to have other people kind of helping support, like the shadow work that we were all doing. And as I said in the chat, one of the people in our group was like, I feel like we're 12-stepping spiritual narcissism. And we're like doing step 4 and step 5, like taking a moral inventory. And it was kind of confessional, with all of us sort of speaking frankly about the ways in which we had maybe violated boundaries or abused our power or caused inadvertent harm, or, you know, taken advantage of somebody for free labor or whatever. And it was, you know, to have a place where that was okay to talk about, where there was compassionate witnessing and a trauma informed. We were using internal family systems, which is one of the things that I teach. So to be able to speak on behalf of the parts that did that, it was so loving and so supported and very, very well facilitated. And so I was really grateful for that and just wanted to say that to anybody who's thinking about participating and isn't sure. And I also just wanted to say, I just came out of teaching a month-long burnout recovery for frontline COVID workers at Esalen. And we spent the whole first day talking about how to cult-proof our community. And I came away, it was so hard. They were so shell-shocked and just so really, really traumatized. And I was trying to model a different kind of sort of leadership where there's more shared power, with the students kind of taking more accountability for their role as conscious disciples and all of that. And it just made me realize how far we have to go to actually enable and empower the students to actually take responsibility for their part. Like, we can do our part around the shadow work of the leadership. But what I find is that, like, over and over, if I try to share power with my students, there are people in the group that don't want that. They want an authoritarian leader that just tells them what to do and doesn't give them choice. And it's very, very difficult. So I just wanted to put in a plug for, like, maybe in the ASI helping us do a better job of educating the consumer or the disciple or the student of how to do their part, because there's only so much we as leaders can do to be able to have more of a leaderless group or more of shared power, while we're still holding the container tight enough for the work that needs to happen within it. So I'm really grateful to be here, and I wish I could stay the whole time. I have to go teach another class in 6 minutes.
Thank you so much. Wonderful to hear from all of you. Okay. Anybody else? All right. Well, we'll have a chance to maybe another opening for some debrief to hear all of the wisdom moving through you. What we'd like to invite you to now is to an experience of what a peer circle could feel like. So we are going to put you into breakout groups. Now, most of you are probably already spiritual teachers, but if you're like me sometimes, maybe it makes you nervous. So just hand on the heart for that part of you that might be nervous. Please don't drop off. Please stay with us. And you're going to be in groups of 3. And we invite you to consider your favorite thing about being a spiritual teacher and your biggest challenge about being a spiritual teacher. And just work with that in an open-ended way. You'll each have we'll break for 15 minutes. So you'll each have about 5 minutes to share, and we'll give you a timed reminder. Please keep confidentiality. What is said in peer support stays in peer support. Invite us all to practice openness and presence, heart-centered connection, and share vulnerably. So go ahead, let's go into breakouts, and we'll see you on the other side. Welcome back, everybody. Wonderful to see your faces again. And we'd like to take a few minutes to hear from you. What arose for you in that? Key learnings or reflections? Of course, keeping confidentiality of others' stories. Just talking about your own. You can go ahead and raise your hand or just unmute yourself if you don't know how to do that.
Well, that was a really quick little pleasure. And I was so surprised by the kindness and vulnerability that could be achieved in 15 minutes. So I thank my group members for that. Yeah.
And I thank you.
I'll just second that. Just gorgeous. I love vulnerability. And to have that container is just precious, and I feel like I've been waiting for it for years. And so I'm just very glad to be here. Yeah, thank you.
One of the points that came up in our group was, making it clear to students if what you're saying is something that you actually know through experience, or you're just propounding some concept, some spiritual concept that's interesting to talk about, but isn't necessarily your experience, and not trying to put on airs and present yourself as something which you're not.
Thank you, Rick. Indeed. Others.
Yeah, and I'll just say, I too was, it was so collegial and so open and just lovely. You know, it was very heartfelt. And there's so much power in that, but very real at the same time. People referred to little things that maybe they were dealing with, or things that worked for them. And it was just very helpful on many levels. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Annie. Helpful on many levels. Indeed. Edward, did you have something? Did I see your hand? No.
I didn't have my hand up, but same thing. It seemed like a small taste of what the peer group could be like, just to be able to connect with somebody who had, very, interesting and similar, experiences in the world. So very nice.
Thank you. Thank you. So glad.
I felt enriched by this sense of I was with two similar hearted individuals that were answering a call that was pioneering to stay true to hear the call and to see it into form, and to do so in a culture that doesn't quite have what they're bringing into form, and yet answering this call to a unique process of self-realization. So because that's part of our lives, part of my life, I felt just supported by the nature of the share and stepping into that level of openness, change, vulnerability, and courage with the ones in my group.
Openness, change, vulnerability, and courage. Beautiful. Thank you, Kimberly.
I'll just add one little point, and that is there was absolutely no pretension, which is an obvious point, but it's very powerful, because pretension can really cloak a lot. And there was just, very honest. It was lovely.
Wonderful. I feel like you all are describing what the peer support circle felt like for me, so you're also describing my heart, and I see that in your faces. So thank you for that. It's extraordinary how nurturing and healing, really having somebody to talk to about these things. Who else can we talk to about these things? Right? Or who else is appropriate to talk to about these things sometimes? And to really see and be seen, as we say, right? In that space is just healing for this planet. So
Phil Goldberg, what's that white thing around your neck? Have you become a priest?
Oh, Phil, we can't hear you.
It's a holy T-shirt, Rick.
Oh, I see. From your little mugshot, it looked like you had the
And if I were to take off the garment over it, you would see the holies.
Okay.
Well, speaking of the holies, Phil Goldberg as an elder in our midst as well. Do you have anything you'd like to share that's coming through? Put you on the spot, the holy spot.
I'm going to pass because, as I told my companions in the breakout group, I have to speak very softly because it turns out my wife is seeing a patient in the next room and I don't want to disturb them. But it was lovely. Thank you for doing it.
Thank you so much. Anybody else?
Oops, sorry, somebody else go ahead. I noticed somebody else started speaking at the same time, but
Go ahead, Regina. Go
one
ahead.
of the questions that was asked in our peer group was, are you a member of ASI, or how long have you been a member of ASI? I think I've been a member from the very beginning, but this is the first time that I've participated, and I was commenting that the reason for that has been just the busyness of the schedule. Like I wouldn't have had time to come here for an hour and a half, whether I wanted to or not. So what's shifting for me is I'm formally retiring from the full-time work. And what I don't know, now I'll still be working occasionally without pay as a spiritual leader, but I'm really falling back into the background. And what I don't know is what challenges will occur for me as I shift from this role that I've been in since about 2005 into not being in this role. So, I went ahead and I filled out the application and I answered the questions the way I envisioned the participation I'll still have as a spiritual leader, but it will be significantly less than now. So I don't know if you'll feel that I belong in this peer group or not, but when I was a full-time spiritual leader, I would not have had the time. Now there may be the time. And again, the challenges that I will have going out of a full-time, from the time I get out of bed till the time I go to bed role, I don't know what those challenges will be. So anyway, just thought I would share. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Regina. Please sign up and we'll go from there. Yes. Was there somebody else?
Well, I was going to say that the things I talked about in the breakout was this distinction between what we teach. If you're in a lineage of any kind, you're teaching things beyond what you have experienced. I mean, if you're not really teaching the entire lineage, because the lineage is coming from much higher than where you are at the moment. And so the fact that it's teaching you as you are teaching, and the fact that in the teaching experience, whatever you want to call that, something comes through that was not from you. It's very clear. And so, as I said many times to students, I say, they thank me after sessions and I say, hey guys, I can't do this without you. It's your pull that pulls something through me, and I am sometimes as amazed as you are. At the same time, I emphasize I am not awake. I do not claim any kind of full awakening. And then at other times I'll talk about the experiences that I have had. Yes, I can say this is what's real. This is what happens. So that distinction between what you are teaching in the lineage, particularly in a lineage, and what you have personally experienced, making that as clear as possible. Sometimes you find yourself walking a fine line there. No question about it. Are you talking over your head? Are you talking out of your hat? That kind of thing. Or are you being as honest and real as you can possibly be? And so that's part of the teaching for me. That's what I'm working on. And I was saying that I think we really need to develop language. And Rick was saying, if I can mention that one piece, that we need to work out the concepts themselves. We have to understand the distinction between high realization. And we recognize this in many of the people who have gone, off the rails, so to speak, that they did have high realization, and yet there were still somehow blind spots. And I think we need to develop the language for explaining how that can be, both for our own students, which will help them to understand us and our blind spots, And, you know, oh, if you've got a blind spot there, you can't be a teacher. Well, actually, those two can go together. And at the same time, helping them to understand, those who come to us or those who are in the larger spiritual community, to understand how it is that some of these great teachers have, you know, misbehaved. How can that actually happen? I think we need to develop the understanding and the language for that.
And so we shall. Yes. Thank you, David. Okay. Well, I see we've got about 5 minutes left before we end, and just really grateful for all of you showing up in this, coming together in this time to bring spirituality to this world. I would like to encourage you all, let's put the survey in the chat box once again, to fill that out, share it with your friends and family that you feel called to share it with, that are spiritual teachers or counselors in that position of bringing ethics, depth, spirituality to this world. We're here to support them. And so that is my wish for this time together, that and I know it will launch us into this next pilot, or not pilot, actually phase of Peer Circles. And we're really looking forward to you all being a part of that. Jack?
I just want to say a few sentences about post this phase. We generally have some idea of what we're doing when we're doing it. And after that, we have to listen again and see what wants to happen next and see what's the best thing in response to this changing culture. The Code of Ethics is an evolving document subject to change. The peer support model that we will develop will be subject to change too. That said, we would really like to have a template at the end of the second phase. The second phase is really important. We're refining what we learned. We want to go deeper with it. We want to get nuanced around what system, what methodology, what are the guidelines to make this a really wonderfully supportive system for spiritual leaders. When we have that model, I envisaged that some papers could be written. It could be posted in journals. Do we spread it widely, like this was developed by the ASI? Use it in your organization. Let's share what we're doing here. What do we do for ongoing support for spiritual leaders? I mean, I think down the road, we could have something on the ASI website which says, okay, these are the groups that are meeting. You can come and join for 3 weeks, at any time, sign up for 3 weeks at a time and a place that works for you. And that you can dip in and out, or maybe you'll know the themes that are being explored in a meeting next Tuesday. And so you can click on it saying, God, that would really be useful. And you can click and join and get a Zoom lesson, a Zoom link. Perhaps something like that could happen down the line. But first, we have to normalize peer support in our culture. We have to normalize that this is a need we all have, and we need to be more responsible for ourselves and the position of leadership that we exercise in our work. And so part of that is taking care of ourselves through peer support. How do we normalize that? So that's the gap that we don't have the answers to yet, which is really interesting. Like, there's the opportunity right now to create the model that would be an evolving model, but it's really interesting. Where can we spread it? How can we advocate the normalcy, the necessity, and make it a normal thing that peer support happens? And so there's a few phases coming, and we don't have the answers yet. We don't. We would love to hear from ideas, emails to the ASI through our contact points would be really good. But I can't emphasize how exciting it is that we're at this place of offering people, hey, influence this template that will be a foundational piece for spiritual leaders in a much broader span than what the ASI is right now. It's as though we're kind of putting something new into the culture in a micro system, but I know that it will ripple out in the macro. I might be dead when it happens, but it will happen. That it will ripple out, you know, in a macro level. So it's really exciting. Be part of the evolving foundational model of peer support that goes beyond denomination, beyond lineage, beyond any of these criteria. That really is a global response to a personal and global need. Come on board.
Beautiful. Come on board. Tom, do you have anything you want to add?
I think Jack said most of it. Yeah, it's not just about I'm struggling, I need support, so I think I'll join. But it's about if you want to be part of this movement and help us think about, you can all help us think about where else it can go. You know, outside the ASI emailing list, you might know people that might be interested in bringing this to their lineage or their organization. And there's this saying that the next Buddha is the Sangha. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So some people think of that like somehow all of us are going to merge into some group mind or something, or maybe some whole lineage or some whole community. Well, that's not going to happen anytime soon, probably. But my vision of the next Buddha is the Sangha is just moving from individual teachers to wisdom circles. And this is part of the creation of wisdom circles, small circles of people where the collective wisdom is stronger and deeper than what we usually expect from individuals, because they can cross-check with each other and manifest something deeper and higher. So let's make it happen.
Jack, may I say something now? Is there time? One of the things I've learned over the decades, and one of the reasons I was drawn to participate in ASI, is what Jack said earlier is very real. I've interviewed hundreds of spiritual teachers and leaders, and they, when they're honest, will often tell me they have no one to talk to. And the impetus for starting as ASI and most of our conversations tend to center around independent spiritual teachers. They are in need of peer support and ethical guidelines for obvious reasons. But it also applies to people who are part of an organization, part of a lineage, part of an institution, because they may have more oversight and more accountability to a hierarchy or to peers. But they will tell you they often can't be honest because they would be ostracized.
Right.
Or, you know, even for just doubting the leadership or feeling, you know, being afraid of being labeled an apostate. And this is very real too. And so I would encourage everybody who cares about the future of spirituality and ASI to reach out to people who are also not just independents, but are part of lineages. I've seen many such people benefit from being with other spiritual leaders who are not part of the same tradition, not part of the same lineage. There's so much learning to be done from that cross-fertilization, and it's an opportunity for them to be honest in ways they could not be with the people who could report them or think less of them, or try to talk them out of what they're thinking and feeling because it's not good for the institution. So, and we all know that ethical violations are not just limited to independent spiritual teachers. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. That says it all. And wonderful way to close. Thank you for coming in, Phil, on that. Well, with great joy and gratitude, we'll say goodbye and close this session and look forward to seeing you all in the next circle and being together. Okay. Thank you so much for joining us today. Bye.